Good morning or good afternoon, whether you're in Miami in person or you're viewing this recording virtually. And a warm welcome to Sustainable Cities Experiences. My name is Albert Slapp, and I'm the president of Risk Footprint, a hazard assessment technology startup in Boca Raton, Florida. We provide online hazard assessments for any property in the United States and resilience accelerating advisory services. Our website. You can reach us at www.riskfootprint.com. Going to try to share my screen with you and the presentation. Great. Hope you all can see that. So, the title of my talk today is The Race to Resilience, Existing Commercial Multifamily Industrial Buildings. And why do I say race to resilience? Well, I'm going to explain that and explain it in my talk today. And why is a talk in Sustainable Cities conference about existing buildings? Why not just talk about the future? If you look at this slide, it's I usually present this as my final slide in these types of presentations. Together, we can achieve a resilient future. The image is so cool, the water is calm, the buildings are very futuristic and seem resilient. Why don't we just spend some time imagining what this resilient future is going to be like? The present is so, well, messy and it's so old school. Actually, things get flooded. Here are some pictures of Hurricane Irma on Brickell Avenue in Miami during the Category 1 storm in 2017. And again, I want to stress this was only a Category 1 hurricane. Here is another image. This was the modeling that we did for the JW Marriott on Brickell Avenue before Hurricane Irma. You can see that we estimated the maximum depth at the building at 3.3 feet, and it was somewhere between 3 and 4 feet for about a day during the storm, as you can see here on the right. So the short answer is that if we don't win this race to resilience, then we're probably not going to succeed in creating that cool and calm adaptation future. The cold hard fact is that 95% of all commercial and multifamily and industrial buildings are existing, and most of them aren't ready for what Mother Nature's currently dishing out in terms of extreme weather, natural hazards, and climate impacts, let alone what's going to be coming because of climate change in 2030, 2040, 2050, and beyond. So if we can't help the existing buildings where most of us live and most of us work, then how are we going to get to a better future? And we have to be thankful that in Miami, Hurricane Irma was a Category 1, but next time it may not be. So where does all this lead us? If you look historically in the last 30, 40 years, we see that the U.S. has sustained nearly 300 weather and climate disasters where the overall damages exceeded $1 billion. The total cost was nearly $2 trillion. And just this year, when I started writing these presentations, not including the Western wildfires, there were 8 weather climate disaster events exceeding $1 billion. Then we had Hurricane Ida, where losses were estimated between 27 and 40 billion. Wind, storm surge, inland flooding in Louisiana and Mississippi. And for the Northeast, Tropical Storm Ida caused an estimated 16 to 24 billion in insured and uninsured inland flood losses. So for the past 40 years, the annual average of billion-dollar disasters has more than doubled. And what's the problem here? This creates what I call a resilience deficit. 57% of the structures in the United States, homes, schools, hospitals, office buildings, factories, are located in hazard hotspots. And more than 1 million buildings lie in hotspots for 2 or more hazards. At the residential level, there's 5 million homeowner flood policies in effect through the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, but 40 to 60 million homes are actually at risk of flooding. There are very few, or in most places, no legal standards or even industry best practices for commercial real estate due diligence for floods, natural hazards, extreme weather, and climate change. There's a lack of private risk mitigation investments, both at the residential and commercial level. We have a lack of government tax and financial incentives and insurance programs to incentivize the risk mitigation investments that we need so desperately. And we lack risk education, communication, or the human element. Why aren't we doing more on the resilience level? And some people say that we're drowning in data and starve for knowledge, which I think is an accurate description. So what do we mean by resilience anyway? Resilience is defined as the ability to prepare, adapt, and thrive in a disruptive and changing world. Resilience is the ability to recover from or be resistant to the impact of natural and man-made disasters, as well as the long-term changes resulting from climate change. Resilience is about embracing the changes that we're encountering, and sustainability is about protecting our resources, and they're quite different. So the question is, are we embracing change fast enough? And the answer to that is probably no. And we were talking about Brickell Avenue in Miami and what happened with Hurricane Irma, a Category 1 storm. So we have to ask ourselves, what flood defense improvements were made to commercial and multifamily buildings, condos and rental buildings in Miami after Irma? What level of protection have they installed to Cat 1, Cat 3, Cat 5? And what would happen if the next storm puts 3 feet of water into these lobbies? The National Hurricane Center, which has over 100 years of data, ranks the return frequency, the annual return frequency of a Category 3 hurricane in Miami as 13% per year, and would put 3 feet of water above the ground level. And then if we add sea level rise to that, a foot by 2030, 2 feet by 2050 and beyond, you can see that we're not prepared. But there is some hope and some good news. And I call these the drivers of resilience, and some things that are changing. We'll go through a few slides. The Security and Exchange Commission, Chairman Gensler, says investors want mandatory disclosure on climate risk. And they want the agency to develop a rule this year, 2021. And he indicated that the prior SEC guidelines on climate disclosure were voluntary and resulted in inconsistencies, and that companies and investors alike would benefit from clear rules of the road. Many of you know what ASTM International is. It's a standard setting organization, has standards for thousands of different activities in the United States and around the world. And one of those is real property due diligence and property transfer due diligence. And it sets the standards, for example, for the phase 1 environmental site assessment and for the property condition assessment. And there's a new standard coming, new guide and a standard for property resilience assessments. It's going to look at the natural hazards, the flood, the wildfire, hurricane, earthquake, droughts, stresses, and storms. It's going to try to confirm those hazards at the real property transfer stage. It's going to involve a site-specific vulnerability evaluation and recommendations for customized resilience strategies and mitigation recommendations. And that's not all. Another new driver of resilience is the Environmental Bankers Association. Now, banks do some underwriting due diligence, but in the flood area, it's really limited to checking the FEMA flood zone and whether the property's in a special flood hazard area or SFHA. But this binary method of examining flood risk is wholly inadequate. And the Environmental Bankers Association has realized this, and for commercial real estate transactions is advocating a much more holistic process for portfolio-wide review of climate risk data, determination of high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and recommendations for further review. And if these reports identify concerns, to follow them up with field observations. And finally, another new driver of resilience is U.S. Green Building Council, which has their LEED hazard assessment pilot credits and their new RELI program. And as a matter of fact, the risk footprint technology has been incorporated into both the LEED pilot credits and the RELI hazard assessment program, certification program. So what does this all lead to? Why is all of this important? In our view, this is going to create and is creating a climate disclosure domino effect. So as physical climate disclosure becomes a requirement in the United States for public companies and companies that take other people's money, then the investors and regulators are going to demand disclosure of physical risks to the assets. That's number one. Then the investees, the owners and operators, must assess their portfolio assets for hazards and climate change impacts. So, number three, the investees, the owners and operators, must disclose which of their assets are at risk for hazards and climate impacts. So the investors and the regulators will get a look at the vulnerability and materiality of the at-risk assets, and they'll seek more information on the investees' plans to mitigate those risks and assets and risks to their profitability. So, number six, the investees will develop plans and capital programs to mitigate those risks at the asset level. And yet there's more. Number seven, the investors and regulators will monitor over time in the future the progress by the investees to reduce risk to assets and profitability. So, what are some examples in the commercial area, at least in the experience of some of our clients, of use cases that move us toward resilience? Something simple like setting elevator floor stops above anticipated flood levels, harden building envelope to minimize water intrusion and water infiltration, relocating the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components above anticipated flood levels, providing methods to protect sensitive building communications like communications and backup systems to protect the occupants, raise seal walls, invest in more efficient air conditioning chillers, larger roof drains, hurricane-proof glass, doorway barriers, regrading, stormwater controls, et cetera, et cetera. And in the residential area, we've had some experience helping developers raise their lots above the sea level rise projections. And in this case, this is a lovely spec home in Fort Lauderdale, where the developer actually brought in $1 million worth of fill to raise the foundations 3 feet above the projected sea level rise. So to conclude, what should building owners, operators, investors, and lenders do now? They should utilize new environmental risk assessment tools to better understand flood, natural hazard, extreme weather, and climate risk at the purchase opportunity and investment stage, mortgage origination, due diligence. And they should seriously consider making resilience enhancing investments soon in properties with high risks where there's a good return on investment. And so I come back to the first slide of the cool adaptation future and say, yes, together we can achieve a resilient future. But we have to get going in the race to resilience now. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to wish you a good conference and best of luck on your journey to resilience now and in the future. Again, thank you very much.